Have you ever heard of the phenomena that if you work too hard for money, you'll end up with less money? What's behind this, and does it really work this way? Well, this topic has always fascinated me, so I'm going to be going over 7 reasons why it's true. And even though I'm going to be quoting from Robert Kiyosaki to establish authority for some of the economic principles I mentioned, this is not just going to be a recap of his article. So don't click away to go read his article. I'm really going to break it down. My goal is to make these economic principles understandable and applicable to everyone, not just those who want to be rich and start a business. So reason number 1, Robert Kiyosaki said in his article, Why Working Harder Can Make You Poorer. He said, work smarter, not harder. And that'll be our number 1 reason. It's the advantage of working smarter instead of working harder. See, working harder could very well be a way of accommodating poor financial strategy. In other words, we use it as an excuse to say, yeah, I know I have poor financial strategy, but it's okay because I make a lot of money, or it's okay because I work hard. No, there's no excuses for poor financial strategy. So that moves us to our number 2 reason then, and that's the benefit of trusting a system that can work without you. Robert Kiyosaki said about this second reason, I needed to learn to build and put together a system that could work without me. Now, this doesn't just apply to business owners. When Robert Kiyosaki says this, put together systems that could work without me, he's talking about what he calls B's and I's. B stands for owning a business, and I stands for investing. He talks about how making money isn't what leads to financial success, but rather it's the generation of assets that leads to financial success. And we'll get into that later. But first, let's just acknowledge that being a business owner isn't everybody's jam. It's not everybody who wants to be rich either. So I'm going to be adding my comments to the principles that Robert Kiyosaki covers to show that this applies to everyone. Even if owning a business isn't your jam, even if you're of the mindset that you want neither poverty nor riches, you don't have to be a business owner to put together a system that can make money without you. That's where the I for investing comes in. When you invest, you're putting together a system that makes money without you. Robert Kiyosaki goes on to say, ones who don't trust that anyone can do a better job than them, and they don't trust a system that can run without them, they're a barrier to their own success. And that's a really good point. We could fall into the trap of saying, I have to work hard because my company needs me. And you're really important and valuable to your company. But it's sad that people often don't realize until they get sick and they aren't able to work that their company continues to function without them. There's no apocalypse. Your spouse needs you. Your kids need you. Your family needs you, but your company doesn't need you. You make a valuable contribution, but if they had to, they'd figure something out. So if we're in an arrangement where we work all the time because we believe our company needs us, then that's just a messed up arrangement. Look at Judy Garland as an example of this. She made an incredible contribution to not only MGM Studios, but also entertainment and music in general. But still, the way that MGM treated her in telling her that all these people were going to lose their jobs if she didn't work hard, and forcing her to take drugs, and then she ended up dying of an accidental overdose of one of the sleeping pills that they forced her to start taking in order to keep up with that schedule, that's just messed up. So actually the opposite is true. Instead of believing that, oh, we're so important and that's why we have to work hard, the opposite is true. If they really value us and our contribution, then they'll respect our limitations and they won't force us to go beyond that. And the other end of the spectrum, someone who's a lot less important, there was a job that I had at one time, and I was sick. I had a doctor's excuse saying that I needed to get plenty of rest in order to ever recover. But the company I was working for, I figured I could go in just for a few hours and put my 8 hours in, go home and rest. But no, they kept forcing me. They knew I was sick, but they kept forcing me to work 14-hour days. And I said, I'm sick. I can't be working 14-hour days. I'll never get better. And they just forced me, no, if you're sick, take a sick day. And that's the only way. So I only had 3 sick days. And so they were forcing me to use those up if I didn't want to have to work 14-hour days. So I ended up having to find a new job. That was just one example of how they were treating me like that. But when they're forcing you to go beyond your human limitations, there's going to be financial repercussions if you don't find a new job. So that leads us into our number 3 reason for this, and that's that if we work too hard, we're not cooperating with the way our human bodies function effectively. Humans have limits, and some people get confused because when these limits are surpassed, humans can also be resilient, and because of our resilience, people sometimes don't realize that the limits are there. You can get away with it in the short term, but over the long term, we need proper sleep. We need rest. We need time spent with our family, etc. Robert Kiyosaki, in reference to the Rich Dad team, said, "We work 24/7, but we love our work." So I want to talk about this a while because I believe it makes a good point, but I think he words it in a confusing way. When I think of working 24/7, I think of getting woken up in the middle of the night and having to work, maybe pulling all-nighters on a regular basis. And he couldn't have meant that because that would have contradicted the other thing he said about how it's not good if you don't trust anyone that could do a better job than you, and you don't trust a system that could run without you. If you have a system that could run without you, you won't have to get woken up in the middle of the night or pull all-nighters. You won't have to sacrifice time that you should be spending with your family. Really, what he meant by this is that he has an active interest in his business 7 days a week. And when we're passionate about something, we keep thinking about it, even when we're sleeping. So in this respect, he's working 24/7 because he's immersing himself in his work, but he's staying well within the limits of how hard a human can function without sacrificing efficiency, and that's key. So by saying, "but we love our work," he's basically saying this is where finance meets psychology. Humans need something to do in order to be mentally and emotionally stable. To be happy, we need to feel we're contributing to something, and that's not lame, that's just the way humans are. So our goal shouldn't be to work to make money, our goal should be to work to be happy. If you're happy and you're healthy, you'll be more productive and people will be more likely to do business with you. So if we work with the goal of achieving mental and emotional stability, then we're going to hit that perfect balance where we're not lazy, but we're also not going to work so hard that our health and our well-being suffers. Attaining the balance that allows us to have optimal physical and emotional well-being will also make us the most likely to achieve financial success. We're better off if we cooperate with how our bodies are meant to function. Going without sleep, having a yo-yo sleep schedule, eating bad food so that you can have more time to work, having work take priorities over the acquisition of knowledge, doing drugs in order to keep up with the pace. All of these habits work against how our bodies were meant to function. If we're immersed in our work in a healthy way, our brains will subconsciously be working even when we're resting or sleeping. So by having time for rest and sleep, we'll be cooperating with the way our bodies are meant to function. So take a look at this image in order to illustrate this. Here's 2 theoretical, hypothetical points here on this graph. And I hope this doesn't happen to anyone, but the point on the far left is the point where someone is so lazy that they're not motivated and they're not making any money, they're not very successful. And then the point on the far right, this is the Judy Garland point. And unfortunately, I can't say that this is totally just a hypothetical point because we do know there were cases where people have worked so hard that it caused their death and they weren't able to make money because of that. So the question becomes, what does this graph look at all the points between these 2 extremities of this graph? So here's our next image, and this would be what you might call the "if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger" graph that some people might argue for. And this is how some people might think that just the more you work, the more money you'll make, all the way up, and you just keep making more and more money until you actually hit that point where it's too much, you die, and then it drops off all of a sudden. Now, I don't think that the graph really looks that way, and I don't have any scientific data to back this up, but I would argue that instead of looking like this, the graph actually looks more something like this, where it's actually in the middle where you actually make the most money, because once you pass up that balance point where you actually start working so hard that it's detrimental to your health, then things start happening. And because it's bad for your health, it costs you more money, and you might not be able to perform as well in the job that you're doing. And so I would argue that actually it's somewhere in the middle that you want to be. And I would also argue that this perfect balance point is the same point, the point where you balance your physical and emotional well-being. That would be the same point where you actually be optimizing your financial well-being. And what better asset could we have than a mind and body that's functioning well? And speaking of assets, this is now going to lead us into our fourth and fifth reason, because making money isn't what leads to financial success, but rather it's the generation of assets that leads to financial success. Well, what does this mean? An asset is something that makes money for us, whereas a liability is something that costs us money. Our car is a liability because we have to buy insurance for it. We pay to maintain it, and so on. On the other hand, assets put money in our pockets without us having to do anything. So this leads to our number 4 reason why making money can actually cause us to have less money, and that reason is inflation. Mike Maloney from the Rich Dad team explains this reason when he says, I've got friends that just say, I need to get more hours, or I need to get a second job or something like that. They're working harder to make a few more dollars, but they don't realize that over the past decade, the average real income after inflation has been falling. So the harder people work, the less they're making anyway, because the government and the Federal Reserve, the banking system, they're basically stealing it from them. So the more money we make, the more likely it is that when you look at the economy as a whole, there isn't going to be enough assets being generated to make up for that money. So we're actually just contributing to inflation at the end of the day, because the Federal Reserve reacts to the money we've made by printing more money. So the money that we've made is actually just making us poorer. Now, reason number 5 is along those same lines. Reason number 5 has to do with taxes. Tax laws are set up to give advantages to people who acquire assets because assets drive the economy. In contrast, making more money just causes you to get taxed more. So a business owner that employs people is going to get tax breaks because he's giving people jobs, and that drives the economy. So instead of working for money, the business owner puts other people to work, and that's financially advantageous because of the tax laws that encourage that type of thing. Now, there's also investments that have tax advantages. So just because owning a business isn't your thing, it doesn't mean that you can't attain assets with tax advantages also. Let's go back to reason number 1, working smarter, not harder. And you know, that's so important, because now that we've been talking about the generation of assets, see, the generation of assets doesn't have as much to do with making money as it has to do with making wise financial decisions. See, working hard for money is actually a way a lot of times of accommodating for poor financial strategies. Someone might be said to have a poor soul in a sense, meaning that no matter how much money is earned, they will still be financially poor. And you might be asking, well, if they're making more money, how could that not result in having more money? Well, mathematically, you might think that it would work that way, but here's the deal. Working hard for money is a brute force method in an attempt for success. And brute force can't make up for strategies that don't work. To illustrate this, think of someone who's trying to lose weight, but instead of changing the food that they eat, they instead just try to count their calories and attempt not to exceed a set number of calories. Well, on paper, that should work, right? Because if you burn more calories than you consume, you'll lose weight. That's a fact. But the reason why this method doesn't work is because even though mathematically it works, it's not a sustainable arrangement. If you have a fundamental problem with your nutritional strategy, you can't use brute force to try to make up for that. Eventually, the arrangement won't last because you'll essentially be starving yourself. It's just not practical. And it's the same with finances. Mathematically, the more money you make, the more funds should be available for you to invest and acquire assets, right? No, you can't use brute force methods to make up for fundamental problems with financial strategy. If working takes priority over the acquisition of knowledge, then you'll never learn anything different and you won't be able to better yourself. Robert Kiyosaki said that people buy things they think are assets and they're actually liabilities. We're talking about making unwise financial decisions here. No amount of work is going to be able to make up for that. Learn how to make wise purchases and wise financial decisions, and then you'll have money left over to put your money to work to generate passive income for you. And we'll dive deeper into that concept in reason 7. But first, reason 6 is that paying close attention to your assets historically tends to result in poor financial performance. Now, this one's going to take a little explaining. See, not everyone can be a stockbroker. Stockbrokers watch the market all the time, and that's fine. However, when individual investors watch the market too closely, they historically tend to get emotional about their trading decisions, and because of that, they have a knack for selling low and buying high. They sell their mutual funds low, and then they start buying again once the market rebounds, which is exactly the wrong way to trade mutual funds. Mutual funds aren't like individual stocks, which do have a significant risk of bankruptcy and the value going under the point of no return. Individual investors get emotional about these mutual funds when there's a negative turn in the market, and they start being fearful that their mutual funds are never going to bounce back, and that's just not very probable. Mutual funds historically tend not only to bounce back, but they tend to continue to increase over time. And that's the point of mutual funds. For people who aren't stockbrokers and might not make the best decisions when it comes to trading in individual stocks, they're given the opportunity to do better with mutual funds. So that's why individual investors are better off not paying too close of attention to their mutual funds so that they don't get in the way of their economic growth with emotional trading. Finally, there's reason number 7, and that's a misunderstanding about budgeting. A lot of people think that it's good to spend time checking how much money they have coming in, how much money they have going out, predicting future expenses, etc., etc. It's a misunderstanding about budgeting. I would compare it to counting calories. The reason why counting calories doesn't work is the same reason why this doesn't work. All this work of checking money in, money out and such is a strategy that tries to use brute force to make up for a fundamental problem in finances. What's going to help is figuring out how to decrease liabilities and increase assets. So if you spend time figuring out if you can spend less money on your insurance bill, utility bill, so on and so forth, okay, then that's time well spent. But here's the problem with calculations about money going in, money going out, and such before making a purchase decision. If any of that matters to you when you're deciding on a purchase, then you have a serious problem with your fundamental financial strategy. If we check how much money we have or make before we decide how we're going to spend our money, then we get into the habit of spending our money based on how much we have, instead of just always making wise financial decisions so that we can build up assets if and when we have money left over. In other words, if and when we do start making more money, we don't want to just spend more. Rather, it's better for us to use that extra money to build up assets. See, we tend to work hard on this so-called budgeting, and we do it the wrong way. If there's something that's truly going to benefit you, then you should be willing to spend money on it. If you want to spend time looking for a better deal, then that's fine. But the problem is with the way that some people budget is that it's like taking time to figure out if you can afford to eat instead of just keeping your focus on how to spend less money on food so that you can afford to eat. If we spend all this time convincing ourselves that we can't afford something that we truly need, the end result is that it will cost us more in the long run. For example, if we do all these calculations and we convince ourselves that we should cut costs by sacrificing the nutritional value of the food we eat, in the long run, we're going to pay more in medical bills, or it might adversely affect our ability to earn money. So another example, we can cut costs by sacrificing safety. But if an accident happens, we would have been better off just spending money up front. Another example, when deciding which car to purchase, if we're trying to decide whether it would be worth it to spend more money to get a more energy efficient car, what factors come into play here? Well, how much you drive is an extremely important factor. If you only drive 4,000 miles a year, then the energy efficiency isn't going to have that much of a financial benefit, and it probably wouldn't justify any more upfront cost. But say you drive 30,000 miles a year on the other hand. In that case, to try to save a few $1,000s by getting a car that's less fuel efficient just doesn't make sense because of the thousands of dollars in energy savings. And based on $3.41 a gallon at the pump, if you would drive a Prius Prime, for instance, for 30,000 miles, instead of a car that gets 27 miles a gallon, you would be saving then $2,400 by driving that Prius Prime those 30,000 miles. So if someone was in the situation where they're actually driving 30,000 miles a year, the only way that it would make financial sense for them to get a car that averages 27 miles a gallon instead of a Prius Prime is if they're saving so much money up front by getting that car that it makes up for that $2,400 a year that they're losing in fuel cost. Now, I know that 4,000 miles and 30,000 miles a year are two extremes, but I picked them to make a point. And that point is that we really need to consider how much benefit are we getting financially from this purchase. So the point is that we do all this hard work of budgeting and we don't budget correctly because our focus is on whether or not we think we have enough money to make the purchase, instead of focusing on how helpful is this purchase going to be in our circumstance. Is it going to save us money in the long run, or on the other hand, is it just going to be a big waste? And the so-called budgeting just serves the purpose at times of getting our emotions involved, and it can scare us away from making the most economical decision. We're spending too much time trying to decide if we can afford things. Instead, our focus should be on one, whether the purchase will really help us or not, and two, if we can find it at a better price. We could spend all this time crunching numbers just to come to the conclusion that we're making more than we're spending, and so we're good. But what good did that really accomplish for us? This takes our focus away from the unchanging reality that maybe expenses can still be cut. Are there still things that I'm spending money on that aren't helping me? Can I eliminate that expense and cut cost? Concerning the expenses that are helpful, can I get the same thing for lower prices? If we're basing our decision on how much money we have coming in, it means that we don't really understand these fundamentals. Always cut costs where we can, but avoid cutting costs in areas where it's going to result in us having to pay more later. Just try to always make the best financial decision. And if how much money's coming in or going out actually matters to you, then you must be pretty doubtful that it's a wise purchase to begin with. Leave a comment and let us know what you think about this. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks so much for watching, and if you would subscribe to our channel, that would be awesome. Bye.